Hi everybody, today I'm talking about my top 10 board games that exceeded my expectations. So all these games, I went into my first game of them, expecting to like them somewhat because I'd heard other good things, or they just seemed like they'd appeal to me to some level. But even from that point, I left the game feeling, that was pretty damn excellent and even better than I thought they were going to be. So I've ranked these games in order of what I was expecting to how good they actually were, in my opinion. So they're not necessarily in the order of my least favourite to my most favourite. However, I think they loosely are just by coincidence. And before I get into the video, I want to give a shout out to the show's sponsor, Kienda.co.uk, who are my go-to online retailer here in the UK. And if you use my link in the show notes, you can get 5% off your first order. But let's get on with the video. At number 10, I have The Lost Ruins of Arnak, which is like a hybrid deck building worker placement game, which to be honest are things that normally don't terribly excite me. However, because I was a little bit late to the party with this one, it already reached a level of popularity and just success really. I mean, a lot of people love this game, so I thought, it's got to be good, so I'll go into it with an idea that it's going to be good. But it even worked better than I thought it was going to, because it's a very smooth game and very little complication. And I think one of the things I like most about this game is the fact that the game arc works really well, because there's only a few rounds in this game. The first time, or the first round, you're not achieving too much, but by the end of it, you're pulling off a lot more and taking much juicier turns. Playing through a lot more cards, your cards are getting better. As you're collecting resources, you're visiting different locations to try and slay these animals. I'm getting points and climbing tracks. And it's just a really well-rounded game that I can certainly see why people have latched onto. Because, a lot of people want to, stop at this level because they're happy with this level of complexity, where there's still a good degree of options, but they don't want all that extra rules complexity or, really get into those heavier games, where this game is just a lovely example of catering to a wide and versatile audience, where, again, relatively inexperienced gamers can enjoy it, but still more experienced gamers can get some enjoyment and some satisfaction from the gameplay mechanisms as well. So I can certainly see why it was good, and it was even better than I thought it was going to be. So that is The Lost Ruins of Arnak at number 10. At number 9, I have Rajas of the Ganges, the Dice Charmers. So this is the roll and write version of Rajas of the Ganges, which is a more involved worker placement game that I actually used to have in my collection, but I did end up removing it because I tend to lean towards heavier, more involved worker placement games as a preference. But I thought if I could get a smaller, more concise, faster version of Rajas of the Ganges, then I'd at least give it the benefit of the doubt and give it a go, because I thought it might capture some of the feel of the main board game. And I'm glad to say this game certainly does do that. You have that river mechanism, you even have that awesome endgame trigger where if you meet your points with your money, then it's going to signify the winner. So it's that race aspect where you're balancing your two currencies. Love the way that works. And on top of that, this game has all the hallmarks of a great roll and write game, where you can string actions together, get those huge domino effect combos, and just take massive turns. And so impressed with this one. Lots of different things to manage. It has a good dice draft and good tension, kind of resource management as you're trying to collect different types, a bit of route building, a bit of a kind of ratchet system as you can go down this river. Just a lot of things in a very simple package that it's definitely become one of my favourite roll and write games, and I've definitely exceeded my expectations on what a roll and write game can be when it's based on an original design. At number 8, I have Longshot, the dice game, which is a bidding and betting style game as you're trying to pick a winning horse and invest as much money as you can in that horse to get massive multipliers when it comes to endgame scoring. You can also buy horses yourself, and if you own that winning horse, you're going to get additional money. You're collecting helmets and jerseys for additional points. Lots of different things you can do here, considering it is a rather simple, betting game as you're rolling dice and moving horses along. And this game, when it was on Kickstarter, I was really on the fence whether to back this one or not, because I do tend to like these style of games, but I thought, do I need another one? Because I already had Camel Up in my collection at the time, and I thought this looks somewhat similar. Do I need it, essentially? But I was very fortunate to go to a convention where somebody brought this one out to the table We played an 8-player game, I believe, and I was absolutely enamored with it. I was just infatuated, and I thought it was so exciting, and I had to immediately own it because I enjoyed it that much. So yeah, definitely had that kind of initial backer's remorse, but I'm glad it's more available now at retail, and I have it in my collection. Definitely a party vibe style of game, but people are going to understand it, and it still does have some good tension. You have that kind of ruckus, cheering along your horses, trying to get into the finish line. You even have a bit of tomfoolery when it comes to kind of moving horses backwards and forwards. If a horse that you're not bidding on is winning, you can pull it back if you want to, and which might really mess with other players. So you do have a little bit of take that and things, but it still manages to pull it off to a very high standard, and I think it's a fantastic example of a bidding game and a racing game at that. So that is a long shot the dice game. At number 7, I have Air, Land and Sea, which is a 2-player head-to-head card game as you're trying to compete over 3 theatres of war, air, land and sea, of course, and you're going to do that by playing these cards from your hand, and these cards are going to have kind of 2 different pieces of information on them. The first of which is going to be the theatre of war it can compete in, like obviously the airplanes are only going to be able to compete in the air area, or the tanks are going to be in the land area, and of course the ships in the sea area. But they're also going to have a number assigned to them, and that number is going to show the influence that it can control that region. So the value 6s are very powerful. However, the higher cards have weaker abilities on them. So if you play like a level 1 card, it might not be worth so much influence, but it has a very powerful ability on them, which can really mess with your opponent by flipping their cards over and making them like weaker, or even helping yourself by kind of breaking rules that you wouldn't normally be able to do. And I think this game might be one of the best examples of a very delicately balanced game where every card is being meticulously designed, and how it interacts and synergizes with the other cards is just genius. So not only do you have to think about, where are you playing these cards, are you going to play them face down, but also the order in which you play the cards, because that is going to massively impact on the way these abilities are triggered. So sometimes you have to kind of sit back and let your opponents display what they're going to do before you play your cards, or sometimes you have to get them down early. But the thing I like most about this game is the end game, or the way that the points are divided, because if you feel like the battles are not going your way, you think you're going to lose, you can choose to retreat from that battle, and the earlier you retreat, it means you're going to give fewer points to your opponent. Whereas if you fight to the bitter end and then lose that way, you're going to give a lot more points to your opponent, and it's basically going to be a race to get to 12 points. And I think that's a brilliant mechanism. It's definitely one of the kind of outstanding features from Air, Land and Sea, and I think this is just an exquisitely designed 2-player game that I'd highly recommend. At number 6, I have another 2-player game with Caesar Seize Rome in 20 minutes. So this game is actually a follow-up to a game called Blitzkrieg, which is a very popular and successful tug-of-war game. And I like that game, but I didn't love it. I'm not the biggest fan of tug-of-war. But when I heard that Caesar was coming out, it uses a lot of the same mechanisms, i.e. in drawing these tokens from your bag, and those being the ones you can play with. But this one is more of an area control style game. And considering this is 2 players, and 2 players only, I thought, how is this going to work? Because normally area control games don't work that well with 2 players. However, this game completely blows that theory out of the water, as this game is one of the most tense games that I think I've ever played, as you're placing these tokens on these different regions. However, these tokens have 2 different numbers on them, and you have to place them on a border between these different regions, meaning that one number is going to go on one region and the other is going to go on the other. So you have to be very careful about what you want to bid and kind of, influence in each region. However, you have to be additionally careful, because if anybody closes off a region, whether they are winning the bid or not, or winning the influence or not, then they're going to get this very powerful token, which means that they can maybe eliminate one of your tokens already on the board, or they can place a lot more of their influence tokens down faster, which is the end game winning criteria. So every single one of these tokens is highly sought after. You have to be very careful with every single placement you make in this game. It has that perfect degree of having strategy, but almost tunnel visioning that strategy by giving you only a few options to place at any time. Where if you had too many options, I think it could be a bit overwhelming and almost steer away from the fun and restrictiveness of the game. So yeah, if you want a very tense game that you can play at 2 players that only takes about 20 minutes to play, it really does not get better than Caesar. Definitely one of the best depth to time ratios that I have in my collection, and again, another game that massively exceeded my expectations. At number 5, I have Viceroy, which is a game quite unlike anything else in my collection. And in this game, you are essentially building up a pyramid of cards. The higher you build these cards in this pyramid, the bigger rewards you're going to get. However, the more expensive it's going to be by spending these runes. But you also need these runes in order to acquire the cards in the first place, using this blind bidding system where you can only select one rune. They come in, I think it's 4 or 5 different colours, and you're going to simultaneously reveal those runes. And if you are the only person to choose that colour, then you get to draft the card that you've bid for. However, if more than one person has bid the same colour, then they're going to cancel each other out and you're going to have to bid again. Meaning that if you keep doing the same thing again and again, you're going to keep bleeding those runes, which is going to be hugely inefficient. So sometimes you need to know when to stop and go for plan B instead. But I love the pure variety of different ways you can score in this game. A ton of different strategies you can go down. Great artwork on the cards. Just a really fun game that feels different each time because, again, there are so many different cards in this game. Another game that's not very complicated, but complicated enough to keep you coming back to it. And yeah, massively exceeded my expectations. That is Viceroy. At number 4, I have Nova Luna by Uwe Rosenberg. So Rosenberg generally is a designer I don't gel terribly well with, but that normally applies to his heavier games. Nova Luna is of the lighter variety, and it actually shares a lot of DNA with a game called Patchwork, which is a game I do have in my collection that I've enjoyed a lot over the years. However, Patchwork is more of a polyomino style game. This one uses tiles in a completely different way, even though you are drafting them in the same way, using this time track system where you can kind of select you can go 1 to 3 spots around this rondelle. When you draft a tile, you're going to move your player piece a number of time spaces equal to the value on that tile, meaning that you will not get another go until everybody else has exceeded you on that rondelle, which I really do love that system. But in this game, you're trying to place these different coloured tiles in a way where they're touching other colours, or you can trace a route through other colours. And once you've achieved all these different criteria on that tile, you get to put these tokens on it to show that those tiles are complete. But sometimes when you place these tiles, it will trigger a bunch of tiles because everything will line up perfectly where, this tile needs to touch a yellow and yellow, this tile needs to touch a red and a blue, this one needs to touch, 3 yellows, and so on. And if you do things very carefully and map things out, you can get these huge satisfying turns where with a single placement, you can basically discard a bunch of tokens which you need to win the game. So yeah, really love the flow of this one, love the different nature of the puzzle, and this one keeps getting better and better for me. And I was expecting to like it because generally lighter weight puzzle games I tend to get some enjoyment from, and they do have a shelf life for me. But this one has been going from strength to strength. I think it's a solid design, and it almost feels timeless in the way it plays because it is so streamlined and just so pure in the way it works. So that is Nova Luna at number 4. At number 3, I have Condottiere, which is a card-driven area control game where you're trying to place 3 tokens of your colour in adjacent regions to each other, or 5 pieces of your colour anywhere on the map. And you're going to do that by, again, very clever hand management and card play. And these cards are going to consist of 2 different types. There's going to be mercenary cards, which are your general strength troops, ranging from 1 all the way up to value 10, I believe. And you're also going to get a bunch of these special cards, which can completely mess with the game in a bunch of different ways, such as making all cards value 1, or strengthening all your highest value cards by an additional 3 points, or maybe cancelling out all the strongest cards. And the way and order you play these cards is so important, because you do not actually replenish your hand of cards until certain things happen, or until everybody has run out of cards, essentially. So this hand of cards has to last you multiple battles. So that means that almost the importance of mapping these cards out is just increased exponentially, because you need to pick your battles. When am I going to invest these cards, which are such a valuable resource, or when am I prepared to just sit back and let the other players compete over these regions and hopefully bleed and exhaust all their cards, leaving me in a stronger position for the next battle. And I love that. I love the interaction between the cards, when to play things at the right time. As I said, knowing when to partake in the battles and know when to sit out, and it all comes together in just a genius design. And now, the reason this exceeded expectations for me is because I was really concerned about the randomness of the card draws. You know, are you going to have a brilliant hand of cards, or are you going to get given a bunch of cards that are just subpar? And while that could be argued it is the case, I do really feel that you can do a lot with any hand of cards here, should the circumstances be right. And if you're looking for a game that scales well, I think it's 3 up to 6 players. This one works tremendously. Has relatively easy rules, and considering there are a bunch of different powers in that, it's not difficult to remember. And yeah, just a wonderfully put together game that just impressed me massively. That is Condottiere. At number 2, I have Mandala, which is another 2-player only game. This one is of the lighter variety, however there is a ton of depth here into the decisions you have to make. So in this game, you are essentially playing cards either into the centre of these 2 mandalas, which will allow you to draw cards back into your hand, to replenish your hand of cards. But it'll also mean that those cards that you've placed in the centre are going to be up for bids by each player. And you're trying to collect these cards because that's going to be your victory points. However, the order in which you collect these cards is so important, because the first card you collect are only going to be worth 1 point each. However, as you collect different types of cards, subsequently, each card is going to be worth an additional point. So some cards might be worth only 1 point to you, but they could be worth, say, 4 points to your opponent. That meaning that when you are bidding to collect these cards, you might want to use the cards that are worth a lot to your opponent to know that they're going to get out of the game so that your opponent can have access to them. So it sounds a bit more difficult than what it is in actuality, but the flow of this game is fantastic. It takes about 15 to 20 minutes to play. The nuances and the sophistication of the game design really did blow me away. So I wasn't quite sure what to expect going into this one. I had heard, rumblings that this game was very well designed, pleasant, but I never really heard a lot of people say that this was like up there with the great 2-player games. And I left this game feeling like this game is pretty much perfection when it comes to a 2-player game. I play this game very regularly. I always have done since I've had this one in my collection. And I love introducing this game to new gamers, because they initially think that, yeah, this is a simple card game, a bit of back and forth, a bit of hand management. But by the end of it, think, you know what, there's something special about this one. And I really do feel that way. So that is Mandala at number 2. And finally, at number 1, I have Capital Lux 2 Generations, which is another card-driven game. However, this one is multiplayer, and I think it even has a solo mode. So I often call Capital Lux a game of blackjack with a moving target, because what you're trying to do is you are trying to match cards in front of you to cards in the city, which in the centre of the board, as closely as you can without going over that limit. Because if you go over that limit, you're going to wipe off all your cards when it comes to scoring and not score anything for them. However, when you play a card in the middle, you get a pretty special ability. And those abilities are going to vary massively depending on the setup that you've chosen at the beginning of the game. So it has massive modularity in this game for a ton of replayability, and all those abilities are absolutely fantastic and fascinating in the way they work and synergize with each other. But I love the hand management of this one. Now, when am I going to play cards in front of myself? When am I going to add them to the capital? When I've added them to the capital, I might be helping other players, because they might be waiting for that to happen, because then they know they've got the green light to play cards in front of themselves. However, there's always that option to manipulate the board state and take cards away from the capital in order to mess with their plans. And it's always on a knife edge with this game in terms of balancing things so carefully. Love everything about this game. It takes about 30 minutes to play, ton of depth, literally on the edge of your seat from start to finish. The hand management is great. The modularity is fantastic. Every single pre-planned game mode in this game is right up there, and there's definitely no subpar version to play the game. I know even the bare basics version of the game I would have been more than content with if that was the only version in the box. But the fact you get so much more content is just amazing. Cannot praise this game enough. It's amongst my favourite games of all time, and if you want a very clever card game experience, then it does not get much better than Capital Lux 2 Generations. So there we go. That is my top 10 board games that exceeded my expectations. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please be sure to hit like and subscribe to my channel and let me know what games exceeded your expectations. But for everybody else, I'll see you next time on Chairman of the Board. Bye bye.